Hey, in this video, I want to talk about AI security. More specifically, how to protect generative AI applications from harmful content, for example. Let's dive deeper into different layers that you, as a solution builder, but also as a cybersecurity professional, need to be aware of where to mitigate potential threats when talking about generative AI. All right, let's dive in. Okay, so the first thing we need to be aware of is how generative AI is prominently used. There are different layers to protecting it. And the first layer, or the first thing we need to start protecting, is the innermost and core part of our solutions, which essentially falls down to the data set, where your data is coming from and what is the quality of your data. Now, if you've been listening to any videos around generative AI and large language models recently, you probably would have heard someone say that if you have garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So we need to address that input and knowing what kind of data set we are actually getting in our models. So the first layer of security we must be aware of is the data set. The data set is the core of our generative AI and our large language models. So if we are getting good information and we are actually verifying the accuracy of that information, that is very important, okay? If we get misinformation or if we get poisoned data sets, for example, that will lead to a large language model or a model that will output undesired content. So therefore, this is the first layer of protection we have to be aware of. So the second layer of protection we have to think about is the model. There are different models out there, different generative AI models, such as OpenAI's Generative Pre-trained Transformer 4, for example, GPT-4, that are very advanced and generate outputs based on its own tokens and embeddings capabilities that were created at the hard code level. But when we think of what threats and potential harms there are to the model, well, selecting the proper model is the first thing we have to be aware of, right? So if there's no need to utilize a very advanced model, we shouldn't do that, because you will open up yourself to potential harms and potential threats that you wouldn't have if you'd chosen a less powerful, less power hungry as well, so more economical, but also less likely to generate more complex text out of it. A second mitigation you can apply to models is fine-tuning it. So when we're using generative AI solutions, such as Copilot and Copilot for Security, it's in my mind, we are talking about models that are fine-tuned for security domains, for example. So that model already mitigates and leaves out potential responses that may be harmful or may be undesired for its intended purpose. And so that is very important, fine-tuning your model for your purpose and for your application. So that is very important there to mitigate harm and mitigate issues in your generative AI solution. Thirdly, it's about the safety layer. So safety is incredibly important in order to filter undesired results out of the output that the model is giving you or giving the user. And when we think of filter, we're thinking about a set of rules that we're applying to our own solution that will ensure that the output is, of course, according to our desired response or desired state or desired application as well. So it aligns with our ethos in terms of what the application is supposed to do as well. When we think of examples of how this can be applied, Azure OpenAI has content filters in order to suppress and mitigate potential content that includes different severity levels, so from low ranging to high severity, and different categories such as self-harm, violence, hate, and sexual content, for example. So these are applied at platform level, and that is very important, okay? Another mitigation control that can be applied to the safety layer is detection of tentative of abuse. So if a user is attempting to break through the model or try to break through the protections of safety that have been applied to the platform, there can be ways that the platform will alert and notify of these potential abuses to enable a faster response in terms of mitigating that user from continuing using and trying to abuse that particular service. The next layer that you need to be mindful of is meta prompting and grounding layer. So this is particularly important in order to mitigate the inputs from the user at the source. So meta prompts essentially define how your model is going to respond. And that is defined from an administrator at the platform, right? So to the model, before the user input is even given to the model. So it's sort of like a pre-input or a meta prompt, if you will, literally, that is sent out to the model before the model even responds to any user input. So that already creates behavior and determines how the model is going to behave when responding user queries. On top of that, we can apply architectural approaches such as retrieval augmentation generation, or RAG architecture, to how you're designing your application that will ensure that your application and your model is going to be grounded on actual data that it's relevant to its responses and its use cases. And that is very common with generative AI solutions that are coming from Microsoft. Think of Copilot for Microsoft 365 and Copilot for Security, for example. These are very specialized generative AI that are grounded in very specific workloads. And that is very important because, again, it reduces the likelihood of deviation of the intended purpose of these models and these services, if you will. And the last one is user experience. That's the last layer that must be addressed in order to mitigate potential harms. User experience means that we're applying necessary application-specific input, validation, and sanitization from the user to the application or to the service. We're also applying necessary controls in order to mitigate the user from interacting appropriately with the platform. And this is what the full picture looks like when we think about all the layers that we need to secure and mitigate potential issues. So when we look at mitigations per layer, well, we're looking at avoiding poisoning, misinformation at the dataset layer. We're looking at avoiding risk of harmful content generation at the model layer. We're avoiding improper output and abuse of the service at the safety level, undesired behavior, non-relevant content, and hallucination at the meta prompt and grounding level or layer. And lastly, input validation and service expectations with regards to the user experience. So with that, I hope you have now a better idea of how to properly mitigate harmful content and mitigate issues when creating and generating your own generative AI solution. Now, when we think of everything that can be generated from this almost magical technologies, we have to always be thinking about what can go wrong. And this exercise has definitely helped me understand a little bit more about where to look for issues, but also helped me understand where things might be coming from within an architecture of that sort of solution. Hopefully it's helped you too. And if you think that has helped you, make sure you leave a like and, well, share this, but also subscribe, because I'll be talking a lot more about AI security in the future. All right, see you next time.